Off we go. Okay, so the Mishnah says here, Mishnah says, Chatashin is arba ba'oila. So if you've got, you remember, we've got two different types of birds that you can bring. You bring the bird for the chatas, for the obligatory korbanot, the sin offerings, or you can bring it for an oila for the burnt offering. So what happens if they get mixed up? You designated it for one, and now all of a sudden you're not sure which is which, and it's a whole story. Va'oila b'chatas, and the oila gets mixed up with the chatas. Afilu echad beribo, even if it's one in a million. Right. So our general rule is that, well, in kashrut we have a rule of 1 in 60 under certain circumstances. The other times we have a rule of the majority. But in the case of something alive, the way the Bartanura puts it in the strictest halachic terminology is the Balei Chaim Chashivi V'loi Batzi. We never have anything that's alive doesn't become bottled. So since it doesn't become bottled, it doesn't become nullified in the majority because it's alive. So therefore, the result of that is Yamutu Kulam. Then you have to kill all the birds. You can't. Well, they're left to die. You can't use the blood of any of them because you might be using the wrong bird. If it's using the wrong bird, then you'd be postulating the sacrifice. Everything would be a disaster. So if that's the case, so therefore all of them are not used for the actual korban themselves, and they just left. Now, what happens if you have a korban chatas, which is now mixed up with one of the obligatory offerings? So how does that work now? Because now you've got a bit of a mixture of korbanot. So it comes along the Mishnah and says, in that case, ein kasher ela k'minyan chatas shebachayva, that the only way it works is that it's only kosher according to the minyan chatas shebachayva. If you've got, so some of the obligatory korbanot are chatases. So if that's the case, if you've got a chatas mixed up in the chayva, so then you can offer that one as one of those chatases. So too, when you've got an oila which is mixed up with the chayvas, ain't kasher lekamin oila shebachayva. The same too, that you can only bring up the number of those birds that are mixed up in the amount that of those korbanot that you're going to bring. We're going to bring korban olot anyway. It doesn't make a difference. Whether what is more, what is less, it doesn't make a difference. The issue is that once there's a mixed up, you can only use the number of ones that you know for sure. So if you've got an oiler mixed up in a whole bunch of chayvas, and you've only got one oiler, even though there are 50 birds, you can only bring up one korban because that is the one that you're absolutely sure of. Anything else that, as we said, the birds do not become nullified because they are alive. So just on that, I mean, we've just finished that Mishnah. As you can see, that we actually need the next Mishnah will explain it a little bit more. But as you can see, it's very complicated, and because the whole idea of having that designated bird and never becoming bottle means the minute you mix it up with anything, so therefore you have a problem that you're not able to do anything else. But now into the next Mishnah. What are we talking about? So the Mishnah now goes, says we're talking specifically in a case of a choiva benadava. The Bartanura says that when you've got the obligatory korbanot, that some of them are chatases and some of them are oilos in kinei nadava, and you mix those up with the kinei nadava with the voluntary offerings, which are all oilos. In such a situation, so then you can choose which ones. Then you can make a cheshbon of how many you can bring up. But when you have, explains, different korbanot that are obligatory korbanot that are mixed up with each other. So the way he says, for example, it says kan stuma shal yoledes, for example, a group of birds that you're specifically bringing up for a woman that's just given birth, or shal zava, or zava, shinis arav bekan shal yoledes, or shal zava acheret, which become mixed up with somebody else. In such a case, now you have a problem because you've got some which are mixed up and some which aren't mixed up. So he says, achas lazu ve'achas lazu. In this case, there's one belongs to one person, one belongs to the other person. Shtaim lazu ve'shtaim lazu, or two of them belong to one person, two of them belong to the other person. Shalosh lazu, shalosh lazu, or three of them. Mechza kasher and mechza posel. Three of them are kosher. Well, sorry, half of them are kosher and half of them are not. So therefore, you would have to bring. You could only bring a certain number of them. You can't bring the whole bunch because only some of them are chattas and some of them are oilers. So, for example, there the way the Bar Tanura explains it, he says, "Umakriv me'arba'ah." You bring when you've got 2 and 2. You bring. You can only bring up 2. One of them is brought as an oiler and one of them brought as a chattas. Okay, you can't bring more than 2, so you can have 6 birds and you can only bring 3 birds. Because if you're going to bring 2 oilers, maybe you're bringing them from one group of birds, and you're bringing them from one group of birds, but they're actually for 2 people. So then you brought up a apostle korban. And he says the same. That applies to me. So what we've got here is we've got this difficulty is that when there's a mix up, you can't even use all the birds because some of them are for sure what some of them are, but you don't know what the others are, and therefore it becomes a problem. And he says, right? Even when it gets to 100 for each person. That the only allowance is up to 50%. So 50% is what we call the mu'at. It's a minimum. It's a minimum. The minute you have 51%, that becomes the majority. So in this case, you have to have an exactly half of those animals that you can bring, because only half of them are for sure will be ones that are able to be brought and can designate to each of the 2 people that are bringing. So it's quite a complicated thing, but we have learned 2 Mishnahs today. We may not understand them 100% in every way that we need to, but we have learned 2 Mishnahs. And I once heard a beautiful idea from, he was the Tolner Rebbe. The Tolner Rebbe lived in the original Tolner Rebbe. So he came out of Europe. He was smashed to pieces by the Nazis, but he had unbelievable chaim. And they say about the Tolner Rebbe that when he was young, that he would go into a shir and a guy would stand up and read the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Lazar. And Rabbi Lazar said, and he'd read the statement of Rabbi Lazar, and the Tolner Rebbe would get up and start dancing. And they'd say to him, we haven't done anything yet. He said, the statement of one of the Tanoim, you've got to be excited, you've got to be lots of us. Perhaps we can use that same thing when we're learning these Mishnayos, even though it's difficult to understand. At the end of the day, these are statements of the Tanoim, and they serve, please God, as a refuah shleima for Isaac. Okay, let's have a good day, and please God, we'll chat tomorrow.
Tomorrow, and Sunday.
Not tomorrow. Yeah, I'm doing tomorrow. If you don't want to come, you don't have to come.
So this whole thing about just quickly, the whole thing about why it would practically be a mix-up is because practically you would only come to the Beis HaMikdash, you'd collect all your things over the year, and then you'd come and do it all at once with all your stuff at once.
It could be that, or when you brought them, you designated the one on the left for this and the one on the right for that, and maybe the cage fell.
Yeah, and what happens if it was the Kohen's fault?
So it doesn't make a difference. But
then the Kohen must pay up.
Shame, man. I give that a break. No,
listen, they want a place of honor. Okay. I'm just saying.
Recorded,
who's going to compensate for damages?
So let's see. That's spoken like a true lawyer, hey, Terence.
I'm busy doing Sanhedrin with my father.
Okay, so that explains it. Okay.
We're only on the first Mishnah.
Okay.
First Gemara.
Is that statement with or without prejudice?